Hi, my name is Neha Shrikant. Hold up. I think I got a message from my mom. Hey, are chiropractors considered doctors? Hmm. What is she asking? Does she want to visit a chiropractor and wants to know if it's safe or legitimate? Does she know someone who wants to become a chiropractor themselves and wants to know if they have to go through the same schooling as medical doctors? Has she met some chiropractor and wants to know how to address them? Without more information, it's difficult to understand how to satisfy her information need. So I'll just write back. In the United States, chiropractors do hold a doctoral level degree, so you could consider them doctors within their scope of practice. They don't hold an MD, though. Let's see what she says. Thanks. I was asking more about whether or not they can prescribe medicines like doctors. Hmm. The original question, are chiropractors considered doctors, wasn't actually flawed because I provided an unsatisfactory answer to her. It was flawed because despite my best efforts to reason about her intent, I couldn't identify what she really wanted to know. This is exactly what we call a poorly posed question. Sorry, Mom. Humans and AI systems encounter these types of questions all the time. These questions of questionable quality serve as the central focus of our work. Hi, I'm Neha Shrikant, and I'll be presenting our paper, No Questions Are Stupid, but Some Are Poorly Posed, Understanding Poorly Posed Information Seeking Questions. This is work done with my advisors Rachel Rudinger and Jordan Boyd-Graber at the University of Maryland. In this talk, we'll go over some of our theories behind poorly posed questions, how to identify them in the wild, and how models and humans behave when faced with such questions. When someone asks, are chiropractors really doctors? They're starting with a visceral need, some underlying dissatisfaction or uncertainty. Maybe they're sitting in a chiropractor's waiting room, wondering if they need to stop at a pharmacy on the way home in case their chiropractor prescribes them medicine, or if they should say Dr. Smith when they get called back. As they try to turn that fuzzy feeling into an actual question, their information need can get distorted. They know they want to ask something, but they can't quite articulate what. Taylor, in his 1962 work, hypothesized that question asking happens in stages. Our asker started with that visceral uncertainty, then maybe formed a conscious thought like, I'm confused about chiropractors and their relationship to doctors. Eventually, they formalized it into, are chiropractors really doctors? But of course, the asker could also arrive at a less ambiguous, better stated utterance of their question. Or perhaps they reach the point where they distill their question into a Google search, like chiropractors' prescription laws or chiropractors versus doctors. In practice, users can ask a question to a system at any point in their question asking process. The onus falls on the answerer, whether human or AI, to reconstruct the latent information need from their question. If, even after reasoning, an answerer can't reconstruct this need, the question is likely poorly posed. Another way to think of questions, and in turn poorly posed questions, is from the theoretical perspective of question semantics. Every question has what we call resolution conditions, the specific information needed to answer it completely. For a well-posed question like, what's the capital of the country France, the resolution conditions are clear, just name the city. But our chiropractor question, the resolution conditions are all over the map. You could provide information about educational requirements, legal licensing, prescription authority, professional titles, or scope of practice. None of them clearly resolve the original question because we couldn't identify which exact pieces of information the asker actually needs. This brings us to our formal definition. A question is poorly posed when, even after engaging in pragmatic reasoning about the asker's intent, an answer cannot identify a dominant interpretation of the question and hence a reliably replicable set of resolution conditions. What does this mean for our chiropractor example? It's not that the question is impossible to answer. We proved that by giving a perfectly reasonable response to my mom about doctoral degrees. The problem is that reasonable askers could interpret this question in fundamentally different ways, and without additional context, there's no clear way to know which interpretation the asker intended. We study questions from r/no stupid questions, a subreddit designed to give users the opportunity to ask questions about any topic or domain, no matter how nascent their information need. We filter posts on the subreddit according to a set of heuristics and collect all the comments on each post thread. We randomly sample 500 post threads, and now we'll walk through our method to identify questions in this set that are likely poorly posed. When we look at our chiropractor question, there isn't just one interpretation. There's actually a whole space of possible interpretations. We established that it could reasonably be interpreted as asking about educational requirements, legal recognition, prescription authority, professional titles, or treatment legitimacy. Each of these represents a different facet of what someone might want to know. We systematically generate reasonable ways someone might interpret a poorly posed question by using GPT-4o and Gemma 2 to generate these interpretation spaces. For our chiropractor question, the models come up with interpretations like, do chiropractors have the same educational requirements as medical doctors? Can chiropractors legally use the title doctor? Are chiropractors authorized to prescribe medications, or do chiropractors provide legitimate medical treatment? Each interpretation is more specific than the original question, and critically, each one has clear resolution conditions. We deduplicate the set of generated interpretations to arrive at a set of unique interpretations of a question. This interpretation space now serves as the foundation for everything that follows, since we can start to measure which interpretations people actually choose when trying to answer poorly posed questions. Check out the paper where we have human annotators validate these interpretations and assess whether these automatically generated interpretations match up with what human trivia players do on their own. But when real people try to answer a question, which interpretations do they actually choose? If, for a question, we see that all answerers adopt the same interpretation, it indicates that the answerers could identify a dominant interpretation. But going back to our definition, if they all choose different interpretations, the question is likely poorly posed. We take advantage of Reddit's comment threads. When people answer a question on Reddit, they look for a comment that matches their interpretation and post a reply or an upvote. If they can't find their interpretation or they need to ask a follow-up question, they usually create a new top-level comment. We develop a matching system to figure out which interpretation each commenter adopted. We use an extractive QA setup to check whether top-level comment C contains information that would answer interpretation I. For a chiropractor example, if someone wrote chiropractors complete a 4-year doctoral program, that clearly matches the educational interpretation, but it doesn't address the interpretation about prescription power. If they wrote they can't prescribe medications like MDs, that matches the prescription authority interpretation. For each question's Reddit thread, we build an interpretation comment matrix. Each comment votes for the interpretations it addresses, and comments with more upvotes get more weight in the final tally. We end up with an interpretation support vector, where entries indicate the number of comments or upvotes that supported that interpretation. We obtain a distribution over our interpretation space by applying softmax to this vector. If 90% of people converged on the same interpretation, that suggests the question wasn't actually that poorly posed. There was a dominant way to understand it. But if responses were scattered evenly across multiple interpretations, like our chiropractor question here, that's a red flag for poorly posedness. We used entropy of the interpretation support distribution to capture this. If the distribution had low entropy, it means that answers converge on an interpretation, and it was well posed. But high entropy of this distribution means disagreement between answers, or poorly posed. Here, we see the distribution of all questions in our dataset, as measured by entropy. Questions with low entropy are those such as, why do we say 21st century when it's actually the 2000s? Or why are we allowed to fill other people's prescriptions? And high entropy questions were those such as, how does calling 911 work? Or can you have anxiety without feeling anxious? You can see that answering the high entropy questions are a little bit more difficult. It's hard to tell exactly what the askers were asking. But does our mathematical measure of crowdsourced data actually correspond to what independent humans think? We test this by having annotators score interpretations for our highest and lowest entropy questions as measured by the Redditors on a 1 to 5 scale, indicating the likelihood that each interpretation aligns with the question asker's information need. So here, a human judge rated the first interpretation as highly likely, the second as also highly likely, and so on. This resultant vector has a high entropy. We find the questions with high entropy from Reddit interactions also had high entropy in human judgments. Questions where Reddit users converge also had clear dominant interpretations according to our annotators. So great, we now have a metric for poorly posedness. But when we give that same chiropractor question to AI systems, do they struggle in the same way that humans do? Or do they handle poorly posed questions differently? We prompt a set of 12 language models to respond to each question in our dataset and compute the same interpretation support vector we computed for humans. Here, each point represents a question in our dataset. The x-axis represents the entropy of the Reddit interpretation support vector, and the y-axis represents the divergence between the human and the model support vectors. The positive correlation shows that LLMs also produce high entropy interpretation distributions on poorly posed questions. Just like humans, the models struggle to converge on a single dominant interpretation when faced with our poorly posed questions. But when humans and models do converge on an interpretation within themselves for a question, they seem to converge on different interpretations. For example, for the question, what's with all the stop signs in the US on the lower right, humans converge on the interpretation, how effective are stop signs in managing traffic and ensuring road safety in the US, while machines seem to converge on the interpretation, why are there so many stop signs in the United States compared to other countries? One interesting difference we find is that humans and models adopt different strategies in answering questions. Humans are precision oriented, engaging in a back and forth to try to settle a particular interpretation, while LLMs were recall oriented, trying to address as many interpretations as possible in a single response. All of this tells us that most questions are not perfect. The tools and the theory that we develop in this work allow us to closely examine questions to identify those that are likely to be poorly posed. This work can help inform AI systems that engage in conversational negotiation to better handle the kind of pragmatic reasoning that humans naturally engage in. Check out our paper for more details, and thank you very much for listening.